Hello, everyone. My name is Janelle Roberson, and today I will be discussing extinction and drug use and drug addiction. According to the National Survey on Drug Use and Health in 2017, 19.7 million adults 12 years and older battled a substance use disorder. Extinction is an important process of learning that is defined as the removal of reinforcers and or biologically relevant stimuli from a previously established stimulus relationship that results in the reduction in responding. What is the purpose of this presentation? The purpose of this presentation is to review literature and examine the roles of extinction in drug addiction. The proposed research questions are: what is the role of extinction cues in the treatment plan of drug addiction? And can understanding the role of extinction cues aid in the pharmacological treatment approaches with treating substance abuse and drug addiction? It is hypothesized that the role of extinction in treating drug addiction is significant. Additionally, it is hypothesized that understanding extinction can aid in the process of treating drug addiction. Extinction is defined as a process of breaking a previously established stimulus relationship by the removal of reinforcers and relevant stimuli, causing a reduction in the response. The learning principle extinction was first discovered by Charles Scott Sherrington in 1906. Originally, Sherrington suggested that changing the physical properties of the stimuli or changing the nerve connection will cause the extinction of a reflex. He studied the extinction of startle responses and spinal reflexes in a white rat. Ivan Pavlov was the first to provide a precise definition of the term extinction. Pavlov first suggested that drugs can function as biologically relevant unconditional stimuli. Later research revealed that extinction was an active process and that the process of extinction can decrease and eliminate a conditioned response. There are 6 different major points that will be presented. The first one is a major obstacle in the treatment of drug addiction is relapse to drug use after periods of abstinence, according to Hunt et al. 1971 and Sinha 2011. In former drug users, drug craving and relapse during abstinence are often triggered by environments or contexts that were previously associated with drug use, according to O'Brien et al. 1992 and Wickler 1973. During extinction, a new association with the stimulus is learned that inhibits the expression of the original memory. That is major point number 2. Major point number 3 is, according to Siegel, 1983, many conditioning processes are recognized and contributing factors in relation to human drug experiences, such as drug tolerance, drug craving, and drug addiction. Major point number 4 is, research suggests that most human drug users relapse to drug use when they return to their home environment after successful extinction of the physiological and psychological responses to drug-associated discrete cues in the clinic setting. According to Carter and Tiffany 1999 and Coughlin and Tiffany in 2002. Major point number 5 is people use drugs to fit in with certain groups or to feel more at ease within a social setting. Substance abuse may feel like a way to escape a problem or a way to reduce stress for the individual. People that suffer from anxiety disorders, trauma, depression, or other psychological illness disorders may begin with using alcohol and drugs to reduce or numb personal distress. They call this self-medication. Major point number 6 is extinction does not destroy the conditioned memory, but extinction does encode a separate association involving the conditioned stimulus. The literature that will be reviewed and referenced includes Costani 2012, Terragrossa and Taylor 2014, Lua et al. 2015, and O'Brien et al. 1986. According to Costani 2012, a brief exposure to a memory of drug use or drug paraphernalia before changing the physical environment, eliminating the drug, will reactivate the memory of drug taking, making it easier to erase the link between the cues of drug taking and getting high, and to replace it with a memory in which no such link is formed. Therefore, utilizing memory extension techniques will relieve drug cravings. According to Torregassa and Taylor 2014, environmental stimuli cues that are associated with drugs promote compulsive drug taking and compulsive cravings, and is considered to be a primary trigger of relapse. Repeated drug and alcohol use causes chemical dependency and or lasting changes to the way the brain functions and operates. In fact, all abused substances alter the area of the brain that is responsible for self-control, emotional regulation, motivation, judgment, memory, and learning by hijacking the brain's natural reward pathways. Organisms learn about the availability of rewards, for example, food, water, and potential mates, by their association with specific environmental cues. Drugs of abuse produce a much greater dopamine increase that does not habituate over time, potentially enhancing learning and memory consolidation about cues associated with drugs and overshadowing the cues associated with natural rewards. According to Luo et al. 2015, cue exposure therapy in the clinic setting fails in many cases because when drug addicts return to their home environment, they relapse. This is because the conditioned cues that a drug addict has can be recovered by acute exposure to the unconditioned stimulus, which basically means that when a drug addict returns to their home environment, he or she starts to respond to the original reward that is associated with that physical environment, which is considered to be the drug. Changes of the physical setting and physical environment and the passage of time from circumstances of extinction result in a failure to retrieve the extinction memory. According to O'Brien et al. 1986, conditioning plays a major role in addiction, and responses to drug-associated cues persist during prolonged abstinence. Understanding and preventing relapse to drug use is one of the most difficult challenges. The main issue is the struggle in helping people remain abstinent. It is very common for people that are recovering from addiction to have at least one or more relapses following treatment.
To find out, researchers in the 70s investigated rats in empty cages with normal and drugged water. Because all their rats chose the drugged water, became addicted, and died of malnutrition, they concluded that drugs are uncontrollable and that a global war on drugs was necessary. But another scientist thought it was obvious that lonely rats in boring cages would choose drugs over water. So he put them in a lush cage called Rat Park with friends and everything a rat could want. His rats chose not to use drugs. He even used addicted rats from the lonely cages, who gradually reduced to become drug-free at Rat Park. That's like many humans who get strong drugs in hospitals and just stop when they go home to a loving family. While alone and unhappy, street users turn into desperate addicts. These experiments show that chemical addiction is not the only thing that matters in drug abuse, and that a person's access to a lush cage is even more important than making drugs unavailable and criminalizing its users.
The purpose of the rat experiment was to prove that psychology is a person's mental, emotional, and psychosocial states, which is the greatest cause of addiction, not the drug itself, and to prove that drugs do not cause addiction, but the person's environment does. This directly relates to my hypothesis because extinction learning is based on environmental cues, and once those cues are eliminated, recovery starts. However, the moment that these cues are presented again, the process of relapse starts again. In the experiment, the social rats had the choice to drink fluids from two dispensers. One had plain water and the other had morphine. There were two different groups of rats. One group of rats that was isolated and the others were social in a rat park. The scientists ran a variety of experiments to test the rats' willingness to consume the morphine solution compared to the rats in isolation. It was found that the isolated rats drank more morphine than the rats that were social in the rat park. While in the rat part, the rats resisted the morphine and drank the regular water only. It was concluded that drugs themselves do not cause addictions. Rather, a person's environment feeds an addiction. Feelings of isolation, loneliness, hopelessness, etc. can lead to drug addiction, whereas in normal environments, non-drug use and resistant drug use is more possible. The limitation of the study is that it's based on a small population and it's rats and not human beings. It is recommended that this experiment occur on human beings for further investigation.
This animation shows a basic experiment that researchers use to test whether a prospective new medication might help people avoid relapse to an addictive drug. With this experiment, researchers rapidly screen potential medications in animals to identify those that hold promise for improving addiction treatment. The experiment has 3 phases: self-administration, extinction, and challenge with a cue for relapse. Self-administration. In this phase, a rat learns to press a lever to self-administer a drug. It also learns to associate a cue with pressing the lever and feeling the drug's pleasurable effect. The rat finds itself in a test chamber with a lever. It presses the lever. A tone sounds and a light flashes. Simultaneously, the rat receives a dose of cocaine and feels a surge of pleasure. The rat presses the lever again, and then again. Each time, the rat sees the light, hears the tone, receives cocaine, and feels pleasure. Eventually, the rat develops and maintains a steady tempo of pressing that maximizes its pleasure. When the rat has maintained this steady tempo across several daily sessions, the self-administration phase ends. Extinction. In this phase, experimenters extinguish the rat's motivation to press the lever by removing the lever's connection to the drug. The rat again finds itself in the test chamber. It presses the lever. Nothing happens. No tone, no light, no cocaine, no pleasure. The rat presses again and again. Gradually, it learns that pressing is futile and tapers off. When the rat's rate of lever pressing falls to near zero, the extinction phase ends. Challenge with a relapse cue. In the final phase of the experiment, the researchers test whether their prospective medication will reduce the rat's response to a relapse cue. Before starting this phase, the experimenters treat the rat with the medication. The rat again finds itself in the test chamber. The sound and light cue from the self-administration phase of the experiment recurs. The rat associates the cue with the drug's pleasurable effect and feels renewed motivation to press the lever. It presses the lever repeatedly, even though it receives no cocaine. This renewed lever pressing parallels a person's cue-induced relapse to cocaine use. The total number of times the rat presses the lever measures the strength of its motivation to seek the drug. The researchers will compare the rat's lever pressing to that of another rat that has also gone through the drug self-administration and extinction phases, but now receives a placebo rather than the medication. If the medicated rat presses the lever fewer times than the placebo-treated animal, the medication has reduced its vulnerability to the relapse cue. A prospective medication that passes this test may be worth testing in people. In these experiments, laboratory animals make an invaluable contribution to finding new treatments for addiction.
The purpose of this experiment is to test whether a prospective new medication can prevent relapse to drug addiction based on extension and self-administration. There were 3 phases. The 3 phases include the following: self-administration, extension, and challenge with a cue for relapse. During the self-administration phase, the rat presses a lever to release a drug, with a sound and light cue accompanying a single dose of the drug. The extension phase is a learned association between the drug and the sound light cue. The challenge with a relapse cue is that the rats associated the cue with the pleasurable effect and renewed its motivation to receive the drug. The researcher of this experiment rapidly screens medication on animals. There are 3 phases that are supported to mimic a person's regular cocaine use during a period where they have stopped using the drug. The rat is placed in a situation where its natural response is to take the drug because of the cues that are associated with the drugs. This mimics the process of extinction because in situations where a person uses a drug in a certain environment and leaves to receive treatment, he or she will be productive while there because the environmental cues are eliminated. But once returning home, he or she may relapse because of the cues that he or she has associated with the drug use. If a prospective medication passes this test, it can aid in finding new treatment for addictions. The limitation of this research is that it is limited and there isn't a lot of empirically supported evidence on this topic. These findings relate to my hypothesis because it examines the roles of extinction in drug use and it provides an experiment on how the process of extinction can later aid in improved in treatment for addiction. What will be discussed next is the discussion, which includes the summary, recommendations, 3 questions, future research, and conclusions. A conditioned response ultimately disappears if the conditioned stimulus is repeated without reinforcement, which modifies addicts' behavior by weakening their memory of drug taking. This will ultimately relieve their cravings and help prevent relapse. When it comes to drug addiction, the addict tends to associate a drug effects with the drug taking paraphernalia in a specific environment, which makes them become more vulnerable to relapse if he or she encounters those conditions. Research suggests that drug relapse and cravings are often provoked by exposure to drug-associated contents, which include environmental cues and drug paraphernalia, etc. When it comes to substance use, the human brain's pleasure pathways becomes activated, and it creates an intense euphoria that is related to an emotional high, which in return, people that engage in substance use may chase those perceived emotional highs each time he or she uses drugs. This ultimately leads to drug addiction because the body begins to build a tolerance. There are many different factors to consider in relation to understanding why a person may partake in substance use. These factors include, but are not limited to, social factors, stress factors, psychological triggers, psychological illnesses or disorders, and peer pressure. It is recommended that this topic is further investigated for an expansion of research on extinction and drug addiction because this could lead to a reduction in drug addiction relapse and aid in finding more effective and efficient treatment methods. The different questions that are being addressed includes the following. What can be learned from this research and what are the implications? To whom are these recommendations relevant and why? What can be learned from this research? This research can promote the development of effective, long-lasting treatments for drug addiction. This research provides its reader with an alternative way to better understand drug addiction in relation to treatment. Understanding the roles of extinction in drug addiction treatment can help prevent or lower the chances of relapsing. What are the implications? This research implies that the Pavlovian conditioning model plays an important role in drug effects such as tolerance, withdrawal, craving, overdose, and relapsing. These recommendations are relevant to everyone. This includes parents, government agencies, organizations, family members, educational institutions, mental health professionals, doctors, and practitioners, etc. Because many people don't understand why or how people become addicted to drugs. They may mistakenly think that those who use drugs lack moral principles. Improvement and expansion on this topic can lead to better treatment methods based on specifically substance use and extinction. This provides newly invented research-based methods that ultimately help people recover by stopping the use of drugs and resume living a productive life. Future research is needed in order to better understand the process of treating drug addiction successfully without relapse by incorporating all the elements of extension learning. Additionally, incorporating comparative studies on the process of extinction and the mechanisms can help guide clinical treatment trials in drug addiction. Future research can improve current studies by providing new knowledge, which can later be translated into more effective treatment plans, hence enhancing the efficacy of drug addiction treatment. According to Barlow 2015, drug use disorders represent a highly prevalent and costly public health problem in the United States and virtually all over the world. A major obstacle in the treatment of drug addiction is relapse to drug use after periods of abstinence, according to Hunt et al. 1971 and Sinha 2011. Learning experiences involving substance abuse and drug use is associated with cues and environmental stimuli that produces a conditioned response to that stimuli. It was hypothesized that there will be a significant relationship between extinction and drug addiction, and that understanding extinction can aid in the process of treating drug addiction. Based on the literature that has been reviewed, the role of extinction in drug addiction is significant and should be better understood in order to enhance the quality of treatment and reduce relapse in drug-addicted individuals. Drugs of abuse interact with stimuli in the drug-taking environment via classical and instrumental conditioning. The